Hi there, this is Pavan from Orgzit, and this is a quick start demo on how to integrate with Orgzit APIs. So this video is going to be relevant to you if you're planning to or trying to integrate with Orgzit APIs for your Orgzit account. Okay, so broadly, there are three steps towards achieving a successful API integration with Orgzit. So the first step is to get comfortable in invoking the Orgzit APIs to access and change data. And to get comfortable, you should never use your main workspace where you're trying to do the integration because obviously you're going to have some trial and error process while you're learning how to integrate the Orgzit APIs. So always as when you're learning the Orgzit APIs, use a trial workspace. So use a simple, like a very simple test tracker kind of workspace that you can install by going into the menu and clicking on Create Workspace, choose a launcher, and then just search for task tracker, so simple task tracker. So this is a great workspace for you to you know get your hands dirty and start learning the Orgzit API. The second thing is to get comfortable with your tables schema. Now, what do I mean by that? So Orgzit APIs work on a table. So a table is like for technical people, you can think of this a table in Orgzit as a Orgzit like a database table, or for slightly non-technical people, you can think of this as a sheet in an Excel workbook. But essentially, a table is made up of rows of data and columns, which we call as the data fields, which make up a record. And a row is called a record in Orgzit parlance. So you need to understand the rules of your table. You need to understand the schema of your table. So what does that mean? So you need to know what are the columns. What are the columns, then what are the rules of the column. So for example, when we see here, we see that department and task are mandatory columns, whereas priority, status, owner, and notes are optional, right? How Okay, and then you also need to know what we call a normalized name of the columns or the data fields. So this you can do by going into the manage table, right? The table management page, and then move down into the table field section. This is where you'll see all the columns or the data fields. Now the APIs will use this this name of the column, it's called the normalized name or the slug, right? And this is a name of a column that cannot be changed. So this is like a permanent name. So you need to know the normalized names of your columns, right? Okay, now the third thing is, once you're familiar with the Orgzit APIs, once you're familiar with your table schema, the third step is just to go ahead and implement the API access for your table in the way that you want. Okay. Now coming to a little bit more about Orgzit and Orgzit API. So Orgzit is a API driven application. So our web applications and mobile applications are completely built on APIs, and we use APIs for all sorts of things, for doing everything in our application. Okay, but for your purpose, most of the time, like almost 99% of the time, you will be using four main APIs to access data. Okay, so these four main APIs are: the first one is getting a record or fetching a record, right? The second is updating or editing a record. The third is creating a record, and the fourth is filtering records. Now, one of the cool things about Orgzit is that Orgzit uses the same four APIs to access any table. So you might have a very complicated schema consisting of tens of tables in your Orgzit workspace, but it's going to be the same 4 APIs that you need to access all of that data, right? So essentially, you just need to learn 4 APIs, and then you need to uh, get familiar with your table and workspace schema, database schema. Okay. Now, a few more terminologies. Whenever you see the word data form in our APIs, so a data form is just a synonym for table. So data form and table mean the same thing in Orgzit. Then data field and column mean the same thing, right? Uh, okay. Now coming to some of the more specifics, one of the things is authentication. So Orgzit uses token-based authentication, and uh, here's an article of how you can find out your authentication, token from your Orgzit account, and how you can use it in your APIs. Okay. So it's linked into this article, and you can find this in our support articles website, which I'll just show you in a minute. Okay. Now, how to pass data in APIs. So this is a little bit technical, and this is something I'll show you in our demo. But essentially, record data is passed in a JSON object called fields. Okay, and I'll show this to you in the demo what this means. And the fields object is keyed by the data fields normalized name. Okay, so this is where the normalized name comes in, and it's really important to understand what is the normalized name of the field that you're accessing. Now there is an exception. So this rule is true, the above rule is true except for two special data types. So these two special data types are user and relationship. Now for these are different because um, in our database, in the Orgzit database, so let's take the example of user. A user is stored using the user ID. So for example, your user ID may be 1000, the number 1000, and this user ID, the user 1000 represents you. So you have an email address, you have a username, you have a full name, and so on. So the data for you, and the same goes for relationships, right? Relationships are like in a relational database, relationships are stored using the ID, primary key of the target record, right? So user and relationship have two kinds of values. There's a display value, and then there's a database value, right? So the display value is passed around in the fields object, but the database value is passed around in the DB values object. Okay, so just remember this. I'll try to show you an example of this. Okay, now so let's jump into a quick demo. Okay, so what you'll have is that you'll have access to a Postman collection for our APIs. Okay, and I'm just going to very quickly walk you through these APIs. So get record or fetch record. Okay, so this API uses a get method. Okay, get, and this is the URL. So all of these have a base URL. You will see that there's a base URL of in this case it's https:// API demo.orgzit.com/API1 record. Okay, so Orgzit API demo.orgzit.com is your account's URL. Okay, in this case I'm using this account called Orgzit API demo, and this um, slash API1 record is like the base URL for accessing the records or data in Orgzit. Okay. Now next I'm accessing this is a record ID. So this is a specific record that I'm fetching. Okay. How do we get this record ID? That you will get by filtering. Okay, which will come, which we'll see in a couple of minutes. And then I'm using this key, right? I'm using this query parameter called use field slug. So you have, this is really important. You have to remember this. You will use this use field slug parameter in all the APIs. Okay, so just remember you have to use this in all the APIs, and essentially what it does is that it tells the Orgzit backend server to use normalized names for the columns instead of IDs for the columns. So we use IDs for the columns, and which won't make sense to you. So please remember to use field slug equal to true for all the APIs. Okay, so let's and then there's a, in the header there's basically one header, one one main header, and which is the authorization. I'm not going to be able to show you that for data security reasons. You'll just have to test it on your own. Okay, and we have a support article covering how to find your authorization header, right? But essentially we use HTTP's authorization header. So it's the word authorization, and there's a particular format for passing in the uh, passing in the token. Right? Okay, so let's fire this up. Right? Okay, so for some reason I've got okay, so just give me a moment to fix this. Okay, sorry for that glitch. So there was a problem with the authorization header, and that's why I got unauthorized. But I've fixed it now. So let's go back to get record, right, and trigger this. Okay, so we get the result. So we get a 200. Okay, so we follow the also Orgzit APIs follow the standard convention of the HTTP status codes. Um, Now, so there's a lot of lot of stuff here, which lot of it you don't care about. The main thing you care about is this this fields object, right? So this field objects is so it has x. So underscore title is a special key, so it gives the title of the record, but everything else is like a column, or a data field, right? Keyed by the normalized name, right? And then let's see. Uh, yeah, the other main thing is the DB values. So the DB values will have the ownership, sorry, the user and relationship fields. In this case, I just have three user fields. So there's a created by user, last modified by, and owner. All of these are user fields, and only one of them has a value. So let me just show you the difference between the DB values and uh, the fields. So look at last modified by. So the DB values is an integer. So this is what we store in the database, whereas the display value is the name of the user. This will be like an email address or a full name of the user that is visible to normal users. Okay. Um, okay. Now let's move on. Put record. Right. So again, the URL is the same. HTTPS, then your account URL, then the base of slash API1 record, and then the record ID. Right. Um, and then in headers we have the authorization header only. That's only important one. And in body we have the payload for the changes we are going to make. Okay, so some things you just kind of hard code it. So data, so we need a data form, and this is a resource URI. So just use this format, API1 data form, and then put the your table ID here, and data form ID, again put the table ID here. Now how to get your table ID, right? So let me show you an example. So this is one of my test accounts. pavan18.orgzit.com, and I'm on that on a table. So look at this URL, right? So this first random looking thing is the workspace ID. You don't want this. What you want is this second random looking thing. Okay, so this is this is the ID for this table, right? So the ID for the task tracker table is this random looking string like YT5J5JMYSB, right? This thing. Just remember, it's the second random looking string, right? Okay. So just put the data form ID, and then remember to put use field slug true. So in this case, we are passing it in the body and not the query parameter, because this is a put request, right? And in the fields, you put the fields that you're changing. That's it. So in this case, I'm changing the status. I'm just changing the status of this record, right? So let's trigger it. Okay. When we trigger it, the response of a put record is exactly the same as the response for get record. So it'll send you the record, right? And it has a lot of additional data. The main thing that you care about is the fields object and the DB values object. Okay. Now let's move on. Post record, which is create, right? So we use post, which is the method, and we in this case the URL is basically /API1 record, right? And the payload is being passed in the body, and it's the payload for post or create record is same as edit record, right? So there's the data form resource URI, there's the data form ID, and then there's this use field slug true. Always remember that. And then there's the fields. Now in this case, I only have fields because I'm not passing any user or relationship fields. If you do pass any user or relationship fields, you'll need to pass them in the DB values object. Okay. Um, Now next is filtering. Okay. So for filtering, uh, this is so the filtering is a little bit more complicated. So I'll not kind of be able to go into each and every aspect of it, but I'll just give you an overview. So it uses put API. This is the URL /API1 record /filter. Okay, /filter. And then the filtering supports pagination, right? So for pagination, we pass in um, two parameters. So we pass in a limit, and in this case, limit has the value of 20, which means that give me 20 records. And the other parameter we can pass is offset, which is give me these records starting at what offset. So normally by default the offset will be 0, and we can we can change it. The header is basically, it has the authorization header. That's the only one that's important. Now let's look at the body. So the body has let's so in data form, just put the table ID. We'll come to filters in a moment. And always remember, use field slug true, just hard code it. And you can also just hard code this get field values false. It's not important to know what this is. Just hard code it to false. This will give you better performance with your API. Now the main thing is filters. Okay, filters, and actually there's another field called sort by, right? So sort by, I'm gonna say sort by ID. So the filters is a list of JSON objects where each JSON object is one filter. Okay, and roughly it relates to this. So so this is Orgzit. So let's say I want to filter medium priority and status completed. Okay, so I'm gonna say um, priority I can use condition or value. Let's say I'll use values here. So priority, value, medium, and status. So if you have multiple filters items, it means there's an and between them. Status, value, completed. Okay, so this is what we get. And we have, let's do condition, right? If we use condition, we get a bunch of condition operators. Okay, so all of these are supported in the API, just that you just have to know what's the name of each of these each of these operators. And the best way to find that out is kind of going to the network console, right? So let's say I want to do priority condition, let's say contains, let's say medium. I'll just type med, okay, and I'll say run it. So we see, so this is our filter API, and right? So you'll be able to see the payload from here. Okay, I'm not going to go into the detail of this right now, but you can use the Chrome inspector to see what is the what is the payload of your filtering request, and learn the learn the data that you need to pass in your APIs. Okay, but roughly, broadly, the format of the filters list is as follows. So it's a list of filters, so there can be multiple filters. So let's say, in the previous example, I would have two filters. I would say, I would have one filter for the priority column, and then I would have another filter for the status column, right? Okay, and then this is the structure for each filter. So there's a field key, which identifies the which column are we filtering on. There's a op, which identifies what's the filter operation, right? So for example, the ops can be contains or equal or blank or values. And then the values is, the value that we're passing to the filter. So here I'm saying that status contains new. That's the filter, right? And then sort by is essentially for sorting. And we it's essentially it just contains, normally it'll just have, either you'll leave it blank, you'll leave it blank. Blank means empty list like this, where the system will just use its default sorting uh, key, or you'll have one element here in this list, which is the normalized name of the field on which you want to sort. Okay, so let's run this, right? Let's run this. So what we see here is that, so the response has a bunch of data. So it returns back the filters that you ran. Okay, let's collapse this. It returns some meta data about the response, which is, what was the limit, what's the next URL. In this case, there's no next URL. What was the offset that we called it with? What was the, what's the URL of the previous page, and what's the total count. So in this case, we just have six uh, records, 6 rows. Okay, and then the main thing is this objects array. So this is a array of records, and the format of this records is exactly the same that we saw in get record, right? So it has, it has this fields um, object, which is keyed by the column name, the normalized name of the column. And then we have DB values. This is for user and relationship fields, right? Yeah, and this is a list. It's a list of objects, right? So this is kind of broadly the broadly the uh, how we use APIs. There are a couple more kind of gotchas and things to remember. But I think those you can resolve by either looking at Chrome Inspector or by talking to your customer, your Orgzit customer success manager. Okay, so for example, one of the gotcha is that the date format. So the date format in Orgzit must be like this, YYYY dash MM dash DD, right? Then the time format. So we don't have a time format here, but the time format is essentially HH colon MM colon SS, right? So there are some of those things, and what you can do is just write into us or contact your customer success manager to address any questions that you have. Okay. Now the last thing is I just wanted to show you that we do have some really cool support articles for API integration, and let me show you the best way of accessing them. So go to support.orgzit.com, okay, and search for API, and this will give you the document, the up-to-date latest support articles that we have, right? So at the time of recording this video, we have 5 articles that I've linked here in this document. Okay, so with that, that was a quick demo overview of how to go about integrating with the Orgzit APIs, and yeah, so wish you all the best with whatever you're trying to accomplish, and feel free to reach out to us and your customer success manager to overcome and address any challenges that you face. Yeah, thank you. This is Pavan from Orgzit signing off. Have a good day. Bye.